Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump discussion or Jump's recruitment discussion. And this week we're going to talk about, is it time to bring new blood into your business? But as always, I like to go through a few facts and figures about, see what's going on from there. And as always, when you start to look about bringing new blood into the business, it's hard to sort of look at facts and figures. So I've started to look at things that will help from there. So according to Safri did a view of the recruitment industry in 2023, and they said 7% of recruitment firms had an attrition greater than 7%. 7% of recruiters had a greater than 40%. 7% of recruitment agencies said that. 32% of agencies reported that an attrition rate of less than 10%, and 21% of recruiters leave within their first year. So obviously bringing new blood in, if recruiters are leaving very quickly, it's an issue. According to a survey by a company called OneUp, first interviews booked to placement in 2024, the survey was done, is saying that it is 8 interviews booked to 1 placement. So it says, what are our performances like? What are we doing with our current staff and what are we doing with our current clients? But it was also the same with jobs. Jobs to placements, according to OneUp, is we take 7 jobs that make 1 placement. So it says our performance is really poor. So when we start to think about, is it time to bring new blood in, or is it time to upgrade our systems and redevelop our systems? We've got to start to look at that. Matthew Baxter wrote on LinkedIn. Matthew Baxter is a rec to rec based out of Manchester, I believe. Wrote on LinkedIn, the average recruiter still only bills 96k a year. So obviously, if you're bringing somebody new in, you've got to start to think about year 1 and year 2 and whether or not it is worth bringing those people in and developing those people to work from there. So this week, I'm joined by Debbie and Tim again. Okay, we are waiting for Dave to join us, but Dave is having technical troubles. And those who know Dave knows that he's constantly having technical troubles. So he will join when he joins, and so that it'll be interesting. We'll give him a round of applause when he does join. Heather is dealing with some HR issues for one of her clients, and Paul is away this week. So we're going to jump on there. So it's going to be really interesting. So we've got Tim from a recruitment background, technical background, Debbie from a coaching and mentoring background. So how we work on this. So I'm going to open it up to everybody. Okay. We hear that lots of redundancies are happening in the recruitment marketplace. Okay, we still have a high attrition. According to PertBox, the attrition rate in the recruitment industry is 43%. According to Safri, it's slightly different, but we take our view from where we want. What impact then will these two things, attrition and redundancies, have on an agency as the market starts to recover? And what should leaders be doing now to combat this? So just throw it open to the team. Tim, Tim, you look sort of like shocked that, oh my God, he's not going to come to me, is he? Tim.
Excellent. All right, okay. Well, I think one of the things that the redundancies have meant, and you're right, an awful lot of recruiters have let staff go over the last couple of years. Like many industries, they came out of the pandemic and COVID years, expanded at a huge rate, and have since, let's call it, normalized their workforce. That's not unique to recruitment at all. That's been seen across almost all sectors. But I think in recruitment, what happens when you reduce your workforce is it's very easy to become quite dependent on a relatively small number of billers, and suddenly the business looks difficult to scale, and indeed some of the challenges that we talked about last week with the hybrid working model make this question of bringing new staff into the business quite a difficult one. And I think that attrition rate, and as you say, Howard, there's a number of different statistics, but whichever way you look at it, recruitment has an attrition challenge. It always has done, which of course then leads you to the question about the ability of recruiters to recruit. They struggle to recruit and hold. So I'll stop there and let Debbie have a go.
Before Debbie goes, welcome, Dave. It's glad to see you can join us, Dave. Glad to see that your technical issues haven't challenged you too much.
Don't you just love it? Don't you just love it when Zoom decides to update just as you press go?
It's okay. Your halo is there, looking strong, Dave.
I'm just looking at that. I think I'll just move a little bit.
Yeah. So, Debbie, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I think whether we've got redundancies happening at the same time as attrition or not, when you're in a high attrition industry, you've got to collect your data. You know, I think in the past when we talked about exit interviews, that can be quite a turn off everybody potentially involved. But you know, we start calling it things like leaver insights these days, and collecting those leaver insights is crucial. You know, Tim's just referenced there that the recruitment industry has always had challenges around attrition. So if it's always had those challenges, then what's the data telling us? And it might be that for those of you listening to this, you're thinking, well, we've tried that, we don't really get anything meaningful, or we don't have the time or the inclination, or we already know what the issues are. You know, recruitment is a tough gig. And I would just say to you that, you know, if you are, you know, time constrained, outsource it. You know, there are people out there that can help you get that data in a really objective way. If you've got the data, when did you last act on it? And I think it's really about understanding, you know, if there are distastes or challenges in the recruitment industry, which there are in numerous industries, how upfront are we about having those conversations when people join us so that they can think about how they're going to tackle those challenges and overcome them? You start having that dialogue early on. So I think, you know, if we're talking about attrition, which comes up time and time again, you can't ignore the data. And when you get it, act on it, because we don't always have to be an attrition high industry. That is partly an option about how we start to tackle the challenges that we've got. And you know, we know that there are challenges in this industry, but you've got to look at what you're doing as an organization, because 35% of employees leaving businesses early are saying that one of the reasons for doing that is that after month one, they don't feel as though their manager cares about them at all. And that's not just in the recruitment industry, that's across the board. People leaving in their first 6 months are citing that reason alone for leaving their organizations. So I think we've got to assume that we've got a part to play in how we manage, how we develop, how we train, and how we hire people. Are we upfront and honest about the distastes and challenges of working in this industry?
So I think as we start to move that, so before I jump into Dave, because obviously Dave's missed the question.
Yeah.
I think from my point of view, as we look at this is about the recruitment market recovering and about the recruitment agency recovering. So to me, it's all about capability and capacity. And I think what a lot of recruitment agencies do when the bad times come, they cut too deep and therefore they struggle to recover. And then you get other agencies that don't cut at all and they struggle to survive because their overheads are far too high, etc. So to combat this, we need to be looking at, as you said there, Debbie, you need to be looking at your data. And I think you need to understand your cash flow situation. But I also think you need to understand what your requirement pipeline actually does look like. And what recruiters are great at is they've got a pipeline of potential, but that pipeline is the potential of today, and they're not looking further ahead. So I think if you really want to know whether or not what you should be doing with regards to either keeping people for your capability and capacity or laying people off or recruiting new people in, you want to truly know what your client base is planning and how they're recovering. So I think you start to look at the capacity that you've got. So to me, I'd be building a calendar over the next 12 months. Some people call it a pipeline calendar. See Bobby Banerjee's on today. Hope you're getting better, Bobby. You know, you talk about the pipeline. I talk about a calendar. And I say, you speak to all your clients, and rather than asking what's going on today, you're asking what's going on over the next 12 months. You start to put the roles in the months that they're expecting to come in. And therefore, you can start to see what capacity you have And therefore, in your business, have you got the capability to fulfill that capacity? And if you haven't, you can start to think about, do you reduce headcount, or do you look at the capacity coming and grow headcount? But it also gives you another question that says, do you cut, do you stick, do you recruit? Because where you've got low requirements or you've got low potential, you need to be adding to that potential, and you can't add to that potential if your headcount is too low, because you're only going to be able to service the clients that give you work rather than being able to service every single client. Dave, I know you didn't come in on this question. Do you want to come in on the question? It's about, we're hearing lots about redundancies in the marketplace. There's high attrition in the recruitment marketplace. And so the question was, what impact do these two things have on an agency as a market starts to recover? And what should leaders be doing now to combat this?
I think just briefly, because I heard the answers. I think for me, just looking back in the last 12 months, a lot of it has been about expectation management. So we interview people and they have expectations about what that first 12 months is going to be. And they're very rarely met. We get really excited when we find somebody that's really good for our business, or we think they're really good for our business, and they set targets. And then 3, 4, 6, 10, 12 weeks into it, it's quite different than what it was perceived to be like at the interview stage. So as leaders, I think we have to be really honest with our interview style, because the worst thing we want, all that knowledge leaves the business. And we do not have a great reputation at retaining staff. And yet we do an excellent job at recruiting staff for our clients. So I think as leaders, we've just got to be really honest with ourselves first about, well, what do we want this person to achieve? How are we going to help them achieve that? What support are we going to give? And that's an ongoing thing in order to retain them, to get over that first 12 months.
So let's push that question then. So lots of recruitment agencies, during the upturn, the pandemic, brought lots of new recruiters in who had never experienced a hard market and were probably more in fill mode than actually recruitment mode, as in new business development mode. What should they be doing then to ensure that those recruiters are equipped to thrive and not just to survive in this market then? So I'm going to push that back to you, Dave, straight away.
Well, I think a lot of it is, most companies that we talk to have less than 20 people. I think all of those 20 people, 15 people, 9 people, whatever it may be, they should always be looking for future talent. And also they should have a really good referral scheme in. And the third thing I would say is use the people that you have hired in the last 12 months to do part of the interview process, so that the candidates can see what it's really like for the first 12 months. And if you are confident enough in their ability to tell the interviewer what it's really like, and the interviewer agrees with that, and the interviewee agrees with it, and they like each other, then you've got a better chance of holding on to them for the next 12 months. So I think make sure you've got a good referral program, make sure you're always looking for people, and make sure your interview is on point.
Mm-hmm.
Debbie?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what Dave said there. And I think that when you're looking for people to thrive and not just survive, as you say there, Howard, in that question, you've got to constantly have the career conversation with staff. You've got to constantly have the kind of developmental dialogue with them. You've got to make sure that their skills and their capacity and their motivations are all kind of in sync. And I think just having meaningful dialogue to ensure that people feel as though they've got a sense of purpose in what they're doing. And as Dave says, where you've got referral schemes, really utilize them, sell them, review them, make sure they're fit for purpose. So I think there's all sorts of things in there that you can do that just help people not feel as though they are scraping to survive, but that they are actually, really given the opportunity to work at their best, reach their potential. So just give them access to the infrastructure that they need to be able to do that. Mentors, coaches, networking, all of those different things, because that's how people start to thrive, when they're aligned and when they're developed.
And I think this this ongoing training, as you've talked there, and as people are finding the market difficult because perhaps they've not met those conditions before. I think one of the hardest decisions for leaders is when should they let people go versus hang on to them. And as Debbie and Dave said, actually, you can only really make that decision if you really understand what their capabilities are, and that they've been supported to try and achieve their success. I think probably slightly comes back to that, not only getting other people involved in the recruiting process, but making sure that you really put your effort into first of all choosing the right candidate, and then once they're in, actually properly supporting them. And I think Debbie's statistic about people leaving in the first 6 months feeling that after month one they were expected to know the job and just get on with it is a really sobering piece of information.
So if you think about that, and you think about the question is, those recruiters that we brought in during the pandemic when the market was on a high, how do we ensure that those recruiters are equipped to thrive in the market and not just survive? So I think what we're talking about is, have we recruited the right people? But to me, the obvious answer then would be, are we training the right people? But in hard times, that doesn't become an obvious answer for a lot of recruitment agencies, because there's a cost assigned to training, and therefore they don't want to put that a cost. So I looked at it in a slightly different way. Tomorrow I've got a post coming out, which is a taster for Friday's newsletter that we've written. And it's about my management recovery after the crash in 2008, and how I looked at my business and my performance of the team that I had, about eight or nine offices. And I started to think about strategy versus performance. And I read an article in 2008 which stated that companies in the main only deliver 63% of their financial target that they've put in their strategy. And so to me, you've got to ensure that your recruiters are equipped, and you need to review your strategy first and then review the execution of that strategy. And I think what a lot of recruiters do is they don't review the strategy because, one of the key reasons recruiters don't perform, because they're either executing poorly and then they're being told by their managers that they have to do more. And I think it's not then looking at the actual strategy itself, because it's the strategy, is it fit for purpose? So I wouldn't look at the people first and foremost. I'd look at the strategy. So A, have we brought the right people in? B, have we trained them into the right things, what's happening in the marketplace, and how are they executing that? And if they're executing it well, then let's review the strategy. If they're not executing it, let's train them to execute properly. And I think that's the bit that we seem to forget, that it's the people that we've brought in, have we trained them to execute what we need them to do properly? And if we haven't, then we as management have to sort of own up and take accountability for that, and look at the strategy and look at how we then can develop our people from there. So here's a slightly different question then. What specific measures then should a recruitment agency have in place to ensure it can handle an accelerated pace of hiring? Because the market's starting to move, this market started to recover. So what measures would you have in place to ensure that you can handle an accelerated recruitment pace?
Well, I think first of all, don't believe that there's a piece of software out there that contains the magic bullet. So, although I'm a technology guy, it won't be the answer. That I think I can guarantee.
Is that it? Is that just don't buy technology?
Well, don't look to technology to solve that, because every single software supplier out there is talking about their AI component that they have, and the way that they can access more candidates in different ways. All of those things are going to have an impact, but it won't be the thing on its own, and it certainly won't be a magic bullet.
Well, I would say the magic bullet on AI is only as good as the person that's putting the information in to get the AI working. So if you haven't trained your people to do that well, then your AI makes no difference.
Yes, prompt engineer is the new job that nobody knew existed
Prompt
18 months ago.
engineer.
That's the one, Tim. That's the LinkedIn #1 job for last year, was prompt engineer.
Prompt engineer. There you go. Debbie, what's your thoughts on that? Because obviously you're not from a recruitment background. You haven't got a recruitment background. So I'm really interested to see what your views are. That, you know, how would a recruitment agency, what would they measure to handle an accelerated pace when their clients start to really pick up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got kind of that past knowledge, potentially, if you're well established, of what a previous acceleration looked like. And I think, you know, that's always a useful terms of reference to look back at what's happened before. I think you can, you know, really pull out anticipation in a number of ways in terms of, you know, talking to people across the whole of your ecosystem, you know, talk to the people in your network, talk to your clients, stay close to them, understand what is happening in the market and when, and talk to maybe some of the more wildcard type stakeholders, people that you feel are maybe fierce competition. You know, what's the harm in having conversations with people where you can, you know, just share insights and information about, you know, how you better anticipate where the acceleration is going to start and how you might respond to it. And then I think it's really about, you know, if you're understanding and anticipating in a much more robust way, how are you kind of staying in pole position as far as hiring and building your team up enough to cope with that acceleration? Are you tapping into a established inactive pipeline of candidates, you know, people that you talk to on and off regularly who aren't actively looking, but you've established rapport with them, you've established an understanding, they're highly likely to join you if the right conditions are met, even if they're not looking at that moment when you first talk to them. So how well established is your inactive pipeline so that you can ramp up? And are you being creative in ramping up to meet that anticipated acceleration? You know, we obsess about attrition in this industry, rightly or wrongly, and we tend to hire quite often in the same way, you know, full-time people with, you know, experience or no experience, whatever it is that we think we need at any given time. And is there a sense of desperation in there? Can we tap into some other employee personas? Can we actually utilize different pools of people and do some wildcard thinking around some of this stuff? So I think anticipation and creativity are the two things that spring to mind when I look at this question.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Deb, because I think often we assume that we have a vacancy for a one person or two people or three people. For most of the companies in recruitment that do have less than 20 people, accelerated hiring is hiring two people.
Yes.
For our clients, when they hire 40, you know, give me 40 of these and 20 of these and 16 of these. But recruiters don't grow that way. The very, very big ones, of course, do. But most recruiters don't work for very, very big companies. So going from 4 to 8 is huge. That's 50%. It's huge growth. So is that 4 people or is that 8 part-time people? Can the work that's needed be delivered in a different way? And for me as well, understand the purpose of the people that you're trying to hire. You know, younger people today, and I may get shot for this, so forgive me for saying this, they're not always talking about a career. They're talking about something to do for the next 2 years before they go traveling. Or they're talking about something to do. Remember that stat we used last year that came out of Facebook? That Generation X, by the age of 50, will have 16 different jobs and 5 different careers. And it's the 5 different careers. If we can understand that mindset, that the people we hire, we may want them with us forever, but they're not thinking like that. No. But they still have a very valid job to do for our businesses, but it may only be for a couple of years. But if we tap into that and then they leave and do something else, they may come back and join us. So I think creativity is absolutely important.
So I looked at this as accelerated hiring from a point of view that your clients are bringing you more and more jobs and you'll have to accelerate and you have to push on there. And I think, as I said in question one, you need to understand your client's recovery and what combines and what that looks like over a period of time. And I think, will your recovery come from your existing client base, from your lapsed client base, or do you need to ramp up your new business? Therefore, what I would measure is I'd be measuring my job to placement ratio. And if you look to that job to placement ratio of 7 jobs to 1 placement, you've got to start to think that, are we working quality jobs, or are we just working jobs at the moment that we're never going to fill? So my strategy and execution would be, am I working with poor clients? Am I working poor roles? So do I need to get better clients and better roles? Then I'd start to measure my consultants' performance by roles. So for my resources, my CV to fill rate, and if I look to my 360 people, I'll be looking at what their client attrition is like. So what clients bought last year, what attrition have we had? Therefore, what do I need to replace? And then I'd start to measure new business. What am I doing to generate new business? Is it calls? Is it meetings? Whatever it is that generates new business, what can I measure it by? And then I focus on the stats that actually generate results, not meaningless KPIs that can just create, mayhem in a business. And so to me, I'd be focusing on the things that actually make me money. And I think in this time, there's too many recruiters that hide behind poor clients with no commitment, poor jobs that we're never going to find people for, where you should be removing those out of the landscape and actually just be working on jobs that make you money rather than anything else. And once you start to focus on that, then it becomes a very different place because people aren't hiding. And I think as a recruitment manager, you've got to sort of really drive that. So how should a recruitment agency be assessing its existing staff then? We're going to carry on this theme to ensure that they have the necessary skills and motivation to contribute effectively to a company's recovery and future growth. Dave?
Well, I think you've got to look at it and go, well, what are the skills? What are the skills for a 21st century recruiter? Let's just go for the next year. What skills do our recruiters need to have? And for me, unless they're sitting at the desks just filling jobs by rote, we want 10 of these and we want 20 CVs. We have no relationship with the client. It's a numbers game. Yeah, that's one aspect of recruitment. But actually, what I think our clients value are those recruiters that can build relationships, that have a general sense of business intelligence, so can have an intelligent conversation about why do you need this person, what will this person do for the project, what will it do for your career, and hold an intelligent conversation and have a sense of curiosity. And if you have got recruiters that can build relationships, are curious and have business intelligence, then I think you're going to succeed in this world where it's quite turbulent and change is always there. If you don't have those skills in your workplace, what do you need to do to get them? Have you got the right people? Is it a training issue, or do you have to hire different type of people? And I think you need to know that. So that's the piece of work that I would encourage people to do. Actually, what have you got? Has the team that's got you there going to get you to where you need to be in the evolving world of recruitment? And that piece of work is something I'd be doing all the time.
Tim, Debbie?
Yeah,
I agree with you there, Dave. Oh, sorry, Tim.
No, carry on, Debbie.
I agree with you, Dave, in terms of that word curiosity. I mean, that's a word that I use with clients all the time, to remain really curious. And I think to have the confidence as well with your skill set. We talked last week a little bit about, people might have the skills, they might have the intellect, the know-how, but things happen to people, and different environments can cause confidence lapses and all of these different things. So it is about skills and it is about confidence in using them. And it is about relationships. We're selling people to organizations and we're selling roles to people. We've got to be able to have meaningful conversations with confidence and with conviction. But I also think that there's more and more evidence gathering on a week by week basis at the moment about people's motivation. And in Howard's question, it talks about skills and motivation. And I think, we need to start assessing that. We need to really look at this issue of You know, between 60 and 75% of employees are unhappy in their work. And again, that's across the patch. The numbers for recruitment are going to be, you know, somewhere in that region, I'm sure, but that's an enormous number of people who are unhappy generally in work. So, you know, what's going wrong? Where's the misalignment? What's happening between the manager and the individual? So I think we've got to start looking at, you know, those stats and recognizing that people are voting with their feet, they're unhappy in their work, or we're seeing this rise in the quiet quitter. And I think all of that presents evidence to say that, you know, whether you're skilled or not, there is a degree of unhappiness in the workplace generally. So, you know, we've got to understand people's values. We've got to understand their strengths and weaknesses. We've got to understand their talents and help them understand the difference between strengths and talents, because they take different energy from you. And we've got to really be looking at how we can perhaps, wherever possible, it's not always possible, but wherever possible, how can we give people work that best plays to those strengths and talents? How can we make sure that they are giving meaningful tasks, that they've got a sense of purpose? So I think it is about assessing the skills, yes, absolutely, and having really robust conversations about where people's strengths lie and what outcomes they achieve with those strengths. But also I think it is absolutely about this motivational piece when the stats suggest that, you know, even the quiet quitter, the numbers there are enormous around, and I think it's something like 24% 3 years ago to something like 74% would class themselves as a quiet quitter. It's an enormous statistic, and we've got to understand the motivation of the majority of our workforce if that is a real number.
Yep.
Go on, Tim.
Well, just very briefly, I think as Howard said previously, understanding your strategy, understanding your client strategy. If your clients are hybrid, if your clients are happy to employ people who work from home, that means you need to be looking at the skills to develop a network of candidates who match your expectation from your clients, and then that relationship piece, because even in the most successful billers will very often come down to a small number of relationships that have been developed over time who provide lots of the work. So, you know, I always say don't look at the clients that you think are providing you work. Look at how many actually client managers are you working with, and how have you got those relationships going.
I think to me it's a slightly different sort of viewpoint that I have then. I'm not too worried about skills. I'm more worried about the attitude of the person that's working for me. And I think it's all about the attitude. In a hard market, I want someone who's going to stand in the trenches and fight for the future, not for someone who's going to moan and wail about the future. So to me, behavior and will in this market is more important than skills, because I can train skills, but I can't train grit, determination. I can't train that just do it attitude from there. So when I start to then assess what I'm looking at, what I start to look at is forecast versus assumption. And so I'll have lots of recruitment consultants who are forecasting every week to me, their pipeline, what's going on. In general, what you expect is a 30% fill rate from that pipeline. What I did in 2008, I started to go back in a very different way, and I started to sit down with all the managers and all the consultants, and we'd take an assumption whether we were going to fill that job or not. And if it wasn't a 95% fill assumption, then it didn't hit the pipeline. And what we generally started to find then, that people would double their pipeline because they went back and started to find jobs that they knew that they could fill, rather than hiding behind jobs that they couldn't fill, or they started going out and qualifying better jobs. They started rejecting clients' roles that they knew they couldn't fill, and they started to educate the clients. So you want someone who's got that attitude to sit and fight, and that attitude not to be subservient to your client. And I think, you know, I had to assume that if it was a no and one of us thought we couldn't place the job, then we didn't work the job. So rather than just sitting on a pipeline and a forecast, I started to work on an assumption. So do we assume that we're going to fill the job? Because if we don't assume that we're going to fill it, why are we working it? Why is it in the pipeline? And to me, that would be the change that I'd be looking at. So I'd look at the existing staff, what they can do, how I assess them by their pipeline and their assumption of what's going to land from their pipeline, and then how motivated they are to actually dig themselves out of the hole if they're in a hole. So moving that on, what methodology should a recruitment leader use to identify the blockages in their strategies or the execution of those strategies to determine if their processes are strong enough to accelerate quickly when recovery comes and when clients start to give lots and lots of jobs out?
That sounds like a really hard question.
Come on, Dave.
It sounds like an A-level question. I feel like I go back to school. I tell you, the thing that this links into is I find that most business leaders don't actually communicate what the strategy is of their company to the people at the desk. And I'm talking about all recruiters. I'm not talking about just the salespeople. I'm talking about the people that are customer facing and the people that support the business. And they don't really know what the company's strategy is. Some of them perhaps don't care, but I think the ones that should know, well, everybody should know, but the ones that know the strategy and where they fit into the strategy are the ones that perform best. Because to your last point, Howard, you get the right attitude if you know where you fit. But if you don't know where you fit, and all you've been told to is you've got to do better with this customer, you've got to send out more CVs, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, all the things about performance, yeah, which we know is important because we want to run profitable businesses. But if you don't have purpose with performance, you don't get performance. You get some will do well, but most don't. So a methodology for me, and I don't think it's a methodology, I just think it's a thing to do, is to share purpose, to share what your company's about, and most importantly, where you as an individual, whether you work in finance, whether you work in tech, whether you work in marketing, whether you work in sales, whether you're a director or whether you are a receptionist if you're working from an office, where do you fit into the purpose of the company? And if you can see where you fit, you then get that enhanced attitude and you get better performance.
So to add to that, Dave, because I'm on the same lines as that, is that the senior management look at strategy when it's the core of the business, the coalface, that's looking at execution. And sometimes the senior management just go, well, the strategy is right, you just got to work harder. And that's not really right. And they don't see the fault in the strategy when the team are actually sat down there flogging themselves to death, but only hitting 63% of the target. And so is it the strategy that's wrong, or is it the execution of the strategy that's wrong? So I think if both parties came together and looked at that and reviewed strategy and removed the areas that are causing the blockages, then you could review the execution of the strategy to ensure that people are actually executing it properly. And so to me, then you make it specific. What problem area have you got? Make sure that we make the strategy then methodical so everyone can follow it, and then measure for its consistencies. But we've got to bear in mind that some consistencies will happen overnight, but some consistencies, especially BD, happens over a longer period of time. And therefore, we've got to review that consistency and the execution of it to see growth and that continued growth, and keep an eye on it so it doesn't stall and the execution doesn't deteriorate. And so I think, to me, you're right, Dave, it's getting both parties together to understand what's wrong and right about the strategy and the execution of that strategy. Anyone else wants to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think I would just add to that, and I agree with what you're both saying there, is that I think we've always got an obligation as leaders to look at what's going on. You know, are we agile? Are we adaptable? You know, in terms of the way that we create a strategy and the way we execute it. And, you know, if we're looking at our operation and we're looking at our procedures, our processes, do they burden us or do they enable us? And I would say, to to Dave's point, there's a lot of individuals who work for businesses who don't have any understanding really of the strategy or the purpose of the organization. So they certainly don't have any line of sight as to how they impact or contribute to that. But equally, how many business leaders have recently gone back to the floor? How many business leaders have recently, you know, gone into the day of the life of a recruiter to understand, you know, just how complicated maybe things are unnecessarily, that maybe their tools and systems aren't what they thought they were, or there's not enough knowledge around them. So I think, you know, there's that two-way appreciation, you know, that necessarily communication isn't what it should be, coming from the top down, and appreciation in terms of, you know, going back to the floor, going back to basics, and seeing what it's like to be a recruiter in your own business for a few hours or a day can be massively insightful. So there's things there that, you know, business owners can think about, can consider.
Tim, anything to add?
Definitely checking those assumptions, because business leaders assume that everybody knows what the strategy is because they talk about it all the time, but maybe they're only talking about it to a few people. And as Debbie said, it's easy to assume how people are working because that's how you would work if you were there, or that's how you were taught. So yes, check those assumptions.
So to me, we've got 2 questions to answer, and we've got 4 minutes, so we need to speed up a little bit, guys. When the pressure is on to generate revenue quickly and cash flow might be tight, which a lot of recruitment agencies will be experiencing at the moment, how do you balance integrating new hires into an existing team while ensuring performance doesn't drop and results remain consistent and team morale remains high?
That's called magic. It's tough.
I think you need to be very clear that there is a real opportunity cost of having a hire that you bring in fail, and that once you've made the decision to bring somebody in, as we said in answer to the first few questions, you have to give them every opportunity to succeed, and that can sometimes mean acknowledging that there will be a short-term impact if you want them to have the exposure and the learning that they're going to need to actually be successful, to stay beyond that 6 months and into the 12 months.
If you treat people differently, to Tim's point, if you treat people differently because there's an immediate cash flow impact or there's an immediate revenue that's needed, and you say, quick, we need to hire these people quickly, we need to get them on board, they need to perform, that's almost a recipe for failure. Because people need the same amount of attention and training and trust and love and, you know, all of that good stuff, whether or not there's a cash flow impact, whether or not there's revenue needed. They need that, and they need that to stay. And believe me, there's a much, much bigger cash flow impact. If you're a business of 10 people and you hire 4 and 3 of them leave, that's 75% departure around the door is a huge impact on your cash, because that's 100,000. That's 100,000 pounds times 3 of revenue, depending on what sector you're in. That's just walked out the door.
And then, so, depending on who
I
you
would just encourage you to treat people the same, irrespective of what the immediate need is.
And I would say, depending on who you believe, Dave, attrition rate in year 1 in recruitment is 73%, according to one report.
Okay, well then that's kind of shameful on us, isn't it?
Yeah. Debbie?
Well, in the interest of time, I'm not sure that I can add anything particularly. I really agree with Dave's comment there and Tim's. You know, we've got to be more consistent about that, because it can just have the wrong effect and create fear and uncertainty, despite the fact that actually you could be going into much better times, but consistency is going to be much better. It's more sustainable.
So I think as a leader, you've got to make the hard decisions. But I think, as Dave always says, you've got the decision need to be led by the data, not by the heart. So as you said, Tim, they've got to make sure there's a workflow coming in that you actually need to recruit the person for. And sometimes we can't become the patron saint of lost causes, because I think sometimes that's what we do, we keep people on too long, etc. So let the data decide. If you can't afford to bring someone new in, don't. But if you can, do so. If the strategy allows you to do so, do so, but look at your strategy and execution. And in my view, if your retention levels of year one aren't below 20%, then you've got to think about your strategy and execution is poor, because you're not going to get the person into year two where they start to make money. So looking at your onboarding, your training, and your recruitment strategy and how well it's executed is really important. And that strategy then leads to morale, because if you've got people coming through the door and then leaving very quickly, then it adds more pressure to the people that are already in there, and therefore morale suffers. So we've got to get that right and work from there. So last question, so very quickly, this is going to be a big question to answer in a very few minutes. I go to you first, Dave, because you'll understand. What services?
This could be a disaster.
Okay, what services beside generic recruitment offerings should an agency be offering to its client to adapt to the changing landscape that's happening as the recovery happens? And lots of agencies are now, also lots of clients now are looking at cost savings. So they're bringing their own recruitment team and they're recruiting recruitment fees, etc., etc. So how do you remain relevant and sticky with your clients when they're trying to do recruitment more themselves?
A quick answer to that is, don't assume that the services you provide are what your client values. Go and ask your client, what services do they value? What services do they think their business needs in the next 24 months? And make sure that the services that your company is offering are the ones that your clients value. And if they're not, change quick.
Yeah,
Debbie, Tim?
just to add to that, I would just say, think about showcasing some extra services free of charge for a period of time. Get your clients to understand and recognise that you've got a much broader offering available, whether that's about DE&I, whether it's about internal hiring manager training, whatever it might be. And there's numerous different things that you can select. It's just about making sure that they're aware you offer that service, and just see whether they'll look at those things on a free of charge basis, just to get a feel to help them solve other problems that they've got that go slightly beyond the hard and fast kind of recruitment aspects of what you've been doing for them. Help them solve other problems.
So final point for me is, again, it's understanding what your key client relationships, what their motivations and objectives are. It's as Dave said, it's the services that they really value, but also understanding what are they targeted on. How can you help them be successful, not just recruiting staff, but actually be successful and meet some of their objectives? How can you support that?
So I think what everyone's saying is right. To me, it's about what we've been talking about for a number of weeks now, about client value proposition and what the client perceives as value. And if you're not providing that, then the client's never going to buy that. They're never going to see you as a value. I also think that if they're looking at stuff like internal recruitment, HR, and doing them for themselves, I'd be asking them which area they don't like doing. So they might find that we don't get many people from our job adverts. Well, can we rewrite your job advert for you? We don't get many people. We got hundreds of people from the advert. We need to sift it. Okay, can we help you sift and create a long list into a short list, into a recruitment list for you, etc. So actually going in and breaking down into the micro parts of recruitment and see what you're offering. Because I think once you get a toe into the marketplace or a toe into the client, you can then get your foot in, your leg in, your body in. You can get everything into the client once they start to see the value. But if they don't see the value, then there's a problem. And one of the big areas I think that clients suffer with at the moment is their employer value proposition. We can absolutely help create a better employment value proposition. So I think we've covered a massive amount. We're 4 minutes over time, so sorry about everybody if you're 4 minutes late for somewhere else. Thank you very much. Next week, we're going to have a really interesting conversation. We know that it's moved from a candidate market to a client market. The question is, what does that actually mean? Because it's been seen such a long time since it's been a genuine client market. So we're going to talk about next week, what does that mean from a recruitment point of view, that it's a client market, and how do we combat that? Debbie, Tim, Dave, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for attending. I hope you've enjoyed it. The recording will be on the website as soon as possible, probably be a little later today because I've got loads of client meetings after this meeting. So it may be early evening before it's on the website, but it will be. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week. Ladies and gents, thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.